Will I see this next one through to the end as well? This is a quote from the diary of Helga Weiss about the uncertainty of her future before transferring from Theresienstadt ghetto to Auschwitz, feeling that millions of other Jews shared. Initial steps Nazi collaborators took following the beginning of World War II. The German and Czechoslovakian governments both implemented anti-Semitic laws in order to further alienate Jews from society. They forced every Jew over the age of 6 to wear Jewish stars in their clothes. They also segregated the schools, and no Jews were allowed to attend the regular non-Jewish schools. Jews were forced to give all their land and economic holdings. Jews were also deported to ghettos and labor camps. Theresienstadt ghetto. After Reinhard Heydrich was appointed deputy Reichsinspector in 1941, 5 transfers were sent to Lutsk, Poland, and 1 to Minsk, Belarus. Fearing further deportation, the Jewish leaders participated with Germany to establish a ghetto in Terezin called Theresienstadt ghetto. 73,468 Jews were deported to Terezin, and later 60,000 of them were deported to Auschwitz. On March 8, 1944, these prisoners were murdered in gas chambers, the largest mass murder of Czechoslovak Jews throughout the Holocaust. The Jews were crammed into a small space meant for 7,000 people, but there are over 70,000 of them. With their limited food supply, the men who worked got more food while the elderly suffered and in most cases died. With all the problems in the ghetto, the Nazis appointed Jacob Edelstein as the elder of the Jews and made him the day-to-day operator of the ghetto. Even though the ghetto was already overpopulated, transports continued to come in. The model ghetto. In 1943, when the first transports of Danish Jews arrived in Theresienstadt, the Danish and Swedish Red Crosses began inquiring about them in the ghetto. The Nazis allowed them to visit in order to show the Danes and the world that the Jews were living under humane conditions. They referred to it as the embellishment, making sure that the ghetto appeared as humane and appealing as possible. Knowing that the overflow of people would be troubling to the visitors, 7,500 were deported, but the orphans and sick were purposely kept, believing that they would help in the facade being made. They took the visitors on a specific route that was beautified with flowers, benches, and sport fields and playgrounds. Then staged bakers and workers, and even erected signs that read "Boys' School" and closed during holidays, in order to give off the appearance that Jews in the ghetto partook in everyday activities. It was no different from any other city. After the visit, the Nazis were so impressed with their work that they decided to make a propaganda documentary. They called it "The Fuhrer Gives a Village to the Jews," enlisting Kurt Geron, a professional in the film industry before the Holocaust, to direct it. He and the other Jews in the film were later sent to Auschwitz and murdered. The film never ended up being shown to the world, as it was only finished in the final weeks of the war.
Alle Kinder von Theresienstadt finden in den Möglichkeiten für ihr Treiben. Auch ein Waschbecken ist da.
Nováky Uprising. Nováky was a forced labor camp in Slovakia. Zionist youth and communists led a resistance movement during which they smuggled in weapons and carried out military exercises disguised as camp drills. In August of 1944, the group successfully launched a revolt, disarming the guards and completely taking over the camp. The freed prisoners joined the Slavic National Uprising in an attempt to overthrow the country's pro-Nazi fascist government. The Nováky group consisted of 250 of the camp's prisoners and was the only exclusively Jewish unit in the uprising. Between 1,500 to 2,000 Jews actively participated in the uprising, 269 of which died in battle. After the war, 166 Jews were honored for their bravery in the uprising. Continuation of Jewish life and ritual. The Theresienstadt had a library of over 60,000 books, and many of those were religious books and Gemaras. So many Jews became learned in Jewish law. Over thousands of lectures were also given, consisting of topics like Judaism and Zionism. Darmstadt ghetto was the only ghetto or concentration camp that did not ban religious observance. Many Jews brought tefillin, Torahs, Sidurim, and shofars. Places were also given to the rabbis of the community to give proper burials to the Jews who perished and to make makeshift places to daven. Deportations. Slovakia was the only non-occupied German state that willingly handed over Jews to the Nazis. They even paid 500 Reichsmarks for every person deported between March and October of 1944. 57,628 Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Only a few hundred of them survived. After the initial deportations, only 25,000 Jews remained in Slovakia, most of them recipients of governmental exemptions that were established under the Jew Code. Following the anti-fascist uprising in 1944, another 13,500 Jews were deported to the concentration camps. After Hungary acquired Subcarpathian Rus in 1939, they denied citizenship to the 100,000 Jews living there. 18,000 of them were then deported and murdered by the Nazis. Following the German occupation of Hungary in 1944, 130,000 Jews from southern Slovakia and Subcarpathian Rus were sent to Auschwitz. An illegal working group was established within the Ostrana Zidov, the Central Office of Jews. Through bribing German and Slavic officials, the group attempted to slow down and stop deportations from Slovakia and all of Europe. Post-war. Only 25,000 Jews survived the Holocaust in Slovakia. The majority of them ended up leaving after the war, and with many of them going to Israel. In 1945, 10,090 of Bohemian Moravia Jews were registered as returning deportees, out of the total 80,614 that were deported throughout the war. 6,392 people died in Theresienstadt, 64,172 were murdered in extermination camps, and 5,201 of the Jews who were not deported were either executed, committed suicide, or died naturally. Only 2,803 Jews that were not deported were alive in Bohemian Moravia, most of them from mixed marriages. About 15,000 Jews survived from Subcarpathian Rus, but after Soviet Union annexed the region, 8,500 of them opted for Czechoslovakian citizenship and moved to Bohemian Moravia. The Jewish survivors faced many difficulties, since the majority had no living relatives and lacked jobs. There were times when German-speaking Jews were interned in camps or even expelled to Germany, and in extreme cases they faced hostility, as in Topolkany, Slovakia, where a pogrom occurred in 1945. The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee helped thousands of Czechoslovak and Polish survivors by giving them money, food supplies, and building homes for children and poor. However, the activities of the relief organizations were restricted after February of 1948 and were ordered to leave the country in 1950. In 1947, 32 Jewish communities were recognized in Bohemia, as opposed to the 162 that existed before the war. Moravia had 13, previously having 45, Silesia had 6, half of the amount that they originally had, and Slovakia had 79. Although many Jewish communities were revived, religious life in most of these communities was limited to the high holidays. After the communists took over the government in 1948, thousands of Czechoslovak citizens emigrated to Israel, helping in the process of founding the State of Israel. 2,588 Jews arrived later in 1948 and 15,689 in 1949. By the end of 1950, only 14,000 to 18,000 Jews remained in Czechoslovakia. Yes!